We talked about the semitone being our preference. We talked about how we build scales from that semitone, and we then build chords. And if you haven't looked into this, please watch the previous videos in this series, or this will be confusing. What we're going to talk about now is something we could call a naming convention, right? Of the intervals in between the notes. And the most logical way of doing that, if it's, anyone would say, okay, we have divided this octave, the distance in between the two notes with twice as many oscillations, we've divided that into 12 different steps. Right? 12 different little steps on the ladder. And then we could easily, because we want to communicate, right? I want to be able to say to you how far there is between these two notes. Right? I want to be able to communicate that in words so we can speak about music and we can build chords and do all kinds of things. And the most logical thing would be to say, okay, since we have these 12 different steps, let's just number them, right? How hard can that be? So we have the first one, second, third, and fourth. So you could say that we take 1, 2, 3 steps up to that note. So this could be the third, or this could be 3. The next one could be 4. So we have a fourth here, or the interval is 4. And we could say this is then 5, this is then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, the octave, right? So that would make perfect sense. That would be totally, how hard can that be? But instead, we did something very differently. And this doesn't make sense to anyone who's looking into music theory the first time, because what we did was first, we took this semitone universe, then we laid on it, over that, the major scale. So we said, okay, let's drop the very systematic, very easy, accessible fact that we have 12 semitones up to our octave. Let's base this on a step above that. And let's say we take the major scale, which is a whole tone, skipping one semitone, skipping another, then going for the next one, then skipping another, skipping another, skipping another semitone. Then we only have 7 notes now. Let's name the intervals after that scale. Let's go, this is the first, this is the second, this is the third, and we call this the major third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, or major seventh, and then the octave. Let's have names for that, and then let's base, because we're missing semitones here, right? So what are the intervals between those? Okay, let's name those in relation to the notes that we already have a name for. Let's take the 7 notes, the 7 steps, and then say, okay, let's say, okay, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And then we have 5 and 4 right there. What's the name of the note? Or what's the name of the interval of the note in between those two? The one we skipped when we created the scale. Well, let's name it after the 5th. So we call it a flat or a diminished 5th, right? But let's also name it by the 4th. So the 4th note of the major scale, you can push that up, and then you can hit that semitone that we failed to name the interval of in the beginning because it wasn't part of the major scale. So we can call that an augmented 4th, or a diminished 5th, or a flat 5th, or a sharp 4th. This doesn't make any sense because now we have notes with 2 different names. Like saying, okay, blue is not just blue, it's also gespüttelflöte. So, and it's Natala. So it's gespüttelflöte and Natala and blue. So I go around, okay, what color would you like your car in? Would you like it in blue, gespüttelflöte, or gespüttelflöte? Is that confusing by any measure? It's so idiotic. But it's the reason why it's like this, and I hope you understand what I just told you here. Let me just repeat it. So instead of naming each interval, the distance in between each note, by just a number of the 12 steps of the semitone, which would make total sense, right? We go 1, we go 2, we go 3, we go 4. Instead of doing that, we start at the major scale level, and we put on top of that the major scale. And then we say, okay, the first note of the major scale is 1, the second is 2, the third is 3, and the fourth, and then we struggle with the intervals in between them afterwards and say, well, what are we going to call the one in between 1 and 2 then? Because we have a semitone there that we could logically call 2, but we didn't do that because we based this whole thing on the major scale. I hope you get me on this. Okay, good. Then why is it like that? What happened was that we developed the keyboard. we said, okay, let's have a keyboard that can, we have this little key here, and when we hit that, it hits a hammer that hits a string, and then we can go bing, 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 right? Instead of having to put our finger on a guitar right behind the fret and use two fingers to get the note out, I can just go bing on a keyboard, and then I have a perfect note. Then what notes do we have on this keyboard? Well, let's just build the major scale. So the white keys on the keyboard, on every key, whole keyboard layout is a story of why this is so insanely stupidly built, this whole theory, this whole naming convention. So let's build it on the C major scale. So all the white keys on a keyboard and in a piano is the C major scale, because that's all we had in the beginning. And so we played along, we said, okay. Right? So we always played in C major, and somebody came along and said, but this melody is really too low for me, a singer, for instance. I need to sing it, I need to get up because my voice, I'm a female, not a guy, so could you please transpose that? Could you please play it in a higher level? And we couldn't do that because we only had the C major scale. It couldn't move the notes up. Or other problems arose from being that limited. And so what did we do? We added the semitones in between. Now we had that keyboard of just that whole system, that whole code. The semitones didn't disappear. We just didn't have keys for them on the keyboard. And so we created them. And what you can see then is that we have a semitone in between the E and the F and the B and the C on the keyboard. So there's no black key in between. But all the black keys that are there are simply omitted or semitones that we left out. And that's why we had that structure of 3, 2, 3 of these black keys, right? So that's a second level of trying to build a good instrument there. But so what happened was that everything, because we started at the C major scale level and then added the black keys afterwards, we had to first say, okay, we started saying, okay, what are the intervals? Well, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like the white keys on the piano. Then we added the black keys, and we had to say, okay, then what? What's the name of that note, that interval? Well, it's a sharp first or a flat second, right? So this is the whole reason why it doesn't make sense when we start naming these intervals. But when you know that, and you can look at that, you can laugh at it, and you can kind of be frustrated for a little bit, and then you can just move on. Because this doesn't make sense from a very intelligent perspective, because the whole point of music theory, of naming notes, of naming chords and intervals, is to be able to communicate, right, with other people. And so when you start giving the same thing multiple names, that's not intelligent, because you're confusing the student or the one you're trying to communicate to, right? So it doesn't make sense. And so there's nothing wrong with you. You're not stupid, you're just intelligent. When you look at it and say, this is amazingly confusing, you're actually right. It's not the teacher, it's the student who's right there. The teacher has been looking into this for 3 or 4 decades perhaps, so it just became the way it is. So we've forgotten that confusion we get when we look at it in the beginning. Say, why does this make no sense at all? It doesn't make sense, but it's just how it is. It's just because we created this in layers, generation after generation.